Some love stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin with silence, with loss, with years of choosing survival over desire. This is a story about the kind of love that doesn't rush in to save you, the kind that waits patiently.
Janet Stone first saw Stephen Brooks in the cafeteria on a Tuesday morning, standing near the vending machines with that effortless confidence only money seemed to buy. He laughed at something his friend said, and the sound carried across the room like it owned the space. She told herself to look away, but her eyes had other plans. She wasn't supposed to notice boys like Stephen, boys whose fathers owned half the buildings downtown, boys who drove cars that cost more than her family's annual rent, boys who existed in a different orbit entirely, one where ski trips and summer homes were normal conversation topics, not distant fantasies. But Stephen Brooks wasn't like the others. He held doors open for teachers. He helped the freshman who dropped his lunch tray without making a spectacle of it. And once, just once, when Janet dropped her books outside the library, he'd bent down to help her collect them, their fingers brushing over a copy of Pride and Prejudice. "Good choice," he'd said, smiling. She'd only managed a whispered thanks before hurrying away, heart hammering so hard she thought he might hear it. After that, she caught him watching her sometimes. In the hallway between third and fourth period, in the library where she studied alone. His gaze wasn't intrusive, it was curious, maybe even admiring. But Janet had learned early that admiration from a distance meant nothing when the distance was measured in tax brackets and skin tone. Her best friend Shanice noticed. "Girl, Stephen Brooks has been staring at you for 3 weeks straight. Say something." "And tell him what?" Janet had whispered back. "That I can't afford to go wherever he'd want to take me? That my dad works maintenance at his dad's company?" "No thanks, you're scared," Shanice accused. "I'm realistic," Janet corrected. What she didn't say was that every time Stephen smiled at her in passing, she imagined a version of herself brave enough to smile back with intention, brave enough to start a conversation that didn't end in polite nothings, brave enough to believe she was enough. The truth was, Janet had constructed an entire architecture of reasons why Stephen Brooks would never actually want her. She'd seen the girls he was supposed to end up with. Madison Carter with her perfect blonde highlights and country club membership, or Olivia Chen whose family had generational wealth that made even the Brooks family nod with approval. These were girls who knew which fork to use at formal dinners, who summered in the Hamptons, who spoke the language of old money fluently. Janet summered nowhere. She worked summers at the community pool as a lifeguard, saving money for college because scholarships would only stretch so far. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father, despite his steady work maintaining the Brooks Industries headquarters, still struggled to make ends meet when unexpected expenses hit. The distance between her world and Stephen's wasn't just wide. It was an ocean, and she had no boat. Stephen, for his part, rehearsed conversations he never had the courage to start. He'd drafted a dozen ways to ask her to get coffee, to study together, to just talk, but every imagined scenario ended with judgment. From his parents, his friends, her friends, everyone. His father had made his expectations clear over family dinners. "You'll meet the right kind of girl at Yale," he'd said more than once, as if Stephen's entire romantic future was a business merger waiting to happen. His mother was subtler but no less pointed, dropping comments about maintaining certain standards, preserving legacy, making choices that honored the family name. Stephen knew what they meant. They meant girls like Janet, brilliant, beautiful. Kind Janet with her secondhand backpack and off-brand sneakers weren't part of the plan, but God, he wanted to talk to her. Really talk to her, not just the polite "excuse me" when they passed in the hallway, or the awkward thanks. When she held the door for the person behind her and he happened to be that person, he wanted to know what made her smile the way she did when she read during lunch, sitting alone by the windows. He wanted to know why she volunteered at the children's hospital on weekends, something he'd only discovered by accident. When his mother dragged him to a charity event there, he'd seen her in the pediatric wing, reading to a little boy with a bald head and tired eyes. The way she did different voices for each character, the way she made that sick child laugh, it had stopped Stephen in his tracks. She hadn't noticed him watching. She'd been too focused on bringing light into that little boy's difficult world. That's when Stephen knew his feelings weren't just attraction. This was something deeper, something that scared him precisely because it mattered. But fear kept him silent. Fear of his parents' disappointment, fear of his friends' mockery, Fear that maybe she didn't feel the same way, that all those glances were just politeness, that he was reading meaning into moments that meant nothing to her. So they existed in parallel, two people circling each other like planets that could never quite align, held apart by invisible forces neither had the courage to fight. The weeks turned into months. Senior year was half over. Janet threw herself into her studies, maintaining the 4.0 GPA that would secure her scholarship to the state university. Stephen prepared for Yale, going through the motions of a future that felt increasingly hollow. Then everything changed on a Wednesday afternoon in February. Janet's father came home early from work, his face grave. The company was restructuring. He was being transferred to the Virginia facility. A promotion, technically, but one that required an immediate move. 2 weeks, maybe less. Janet's world tilted. She'd just started to feel settled, to have friends, to have a routine, and Stephen, she'd never have the chance to know if her imagination had been creating something out of nothing, or if those looks across the library had meant what her heart insisted they meant. Her last day was a Friday. She'd spent the morning saying quiet goodbyes to teachers who'd believed in her, to Shanice who cried and made her promise to call every week. She'd turned in her textbooks, cleared out her locker, returned her library books. She saw Stephen one final time in the hallway outside the principal's office. The corridor was crowded with students rushing between classes, the usual chaos of a Friday afternoon. But when their eyes met across that sea of people, everything else fell away. She saw recognition flash across his face, then something that looked like panic. He took a step forward, hesitated. His hand lifted slightly, a half-wave frozen in uncertainty, his mouth opening as if to call out to her. Janet felt her heart crack. Even now at the end, neither of them was brave enough. She wanted to run to him, to say all the things she'd practiced in her head during sleepless nights, to ask if he'd felt it too, this impossible pull between them, to ask if things could have been different in another life, another world, another version of reality where class and race and parental expectations didn't build walls between hearts. Instead, she smiled, small, sad, final, a goodbye that carried everything she couldn't say. The bell rang. Students surged forward, and the current swept them apart like driftwood in opposite tides. Stephen stood frozen in the hallway long after she disappeared. His hand still half raised, opportunity dissolved into regret. Two hearts that had circled each other for months, never brave enough to collide. Now separated by 400 miles and a lifetime of what-ifs, neither of them forgot, and neither of them knew that silence had a way of echoing through the years, waiting for a second chance that seemed impossible, waiting for a morning jog 20 years later, when fate would finally force them to speak. Janet married Marcus Wells 3 weeks after her 21st birthday, in a small ceremony at her mother's church with borrowed flowers and a dress she'd found on clearance. She told herself it was love. Marcus was kind, stable, present, everything a practical woman should want. He worked construction, had a steady paycheck, and didn't flinch when she told him about her plans for nursing school. "We'll make it work," he'd said, and she'd believed him because believing was easier than admitting the truth. She was marrying security, not passion. She was choosing the safe harbor after years of watching her parents struggle, after moving to Virginia had taught her that dreams about boys like Stephen Brooks were just that, dreams. Marcus never made her heart race the way Stephen's smile once had, but he held her hand. Through her mother's cancer, diagnosis 6 months into their marriage, he worked double shifts so she could stay by her mother's bedside during those final terrible weeks. And when Janet's mother died on a Tuesday morning in March, Marcus had been the one to hold her while she shattered. "You don't have to be strong all the time," he'd whispered. But she did. Someone had to be. Nursing school was harder than she'd imagined. Janet would study until 2 a.m., wake up at 5:30 to get to clinical rotations, then come home to a husband who needed dinner and attention. She barely had energy to give. Marcus never complained, not really, but she could see the loneliness in his eyes when she fell asleep during movies, when she was too exhausted for conversation, when her textbooks got more affection than he did. "I'm sorry," she'd say. "It's temporary," he'd answer. "You're building something," she was. Slowly, painfully, she was building a life where she'd never have to depend on anyone the way her mother had depended on her father. A life where she could take care of herself, take care of others, stand on her own 2 feet no matter what came. Then she got pregnant with Edward. It wasn't planned. Janet had been in her final year of nursing school, so close to the finish line she could taste it. The pregnancy felt like a trap, like life's way of saying, women like her didn't get to want more than one thing at a time. She'd cried for 3 days straight, mourning the future she thought she was losing. Marcus had been unflinchingly supportive. "We'll figure it out. You've come too far to quit now." So she didn't quit. She finished nursing school 8 months pregnant, walked across that graduation stage with swollen ankles and a back that ached constantly, and cried tears that were equal parts relief and exhaustion. Edward was born 2 weeks later, screaming his way into the world like he had opinions about the timing too. The twins, Jasmine and Zara, came 3 years later, another surprise that left Janet wondering if the universe was testing how much one woman could juggle. 3 children under 5, night shifts at the hospital, a husband whose patience was starting to fray at the edges. "When do I get you back?" Marcus asked one night, after she'd missed another dinner because of mandatory overtime. "I'm right here," she'd said, but they both knew it was a lie. She was spread so thin she was translucent. Mother, nurse, wife, daughter to an aging father who called every Sunday asking when she'd visit. There was no room left for the girl who once dreamed, who once felt butterflies, who once believed in love that made your hands shake. But Marcus stayed. He coached Edward's little league team. He braided the twins' hair when Janet worked double shifts. He loved her the way steady rain loves the earth, reliable, life-giving, unsexy. And Janet learned to be grateful for steady, grateful for a man who didn't leave when things got hard. Then her father died. Heart attack. Sudden. Gone before she could get on a plane back to Virginia. Marcus held her through that grief too, but something in Janet hardened. Loss became a language she spoke fluently, and she built walls so high around her heart that nothing could climb them, not even her husband. "You're different," Marcus said one night, his voice careful. "People change," Janet replied, which wasn't an answer at all. They stayed married but drifted. 2 people sharing a house and children and bills, but little else. Janet told herself it was enough. That partnership mattered more than passion. That she was doing what needed to be done. Then Marcus started losing weight. At first she thought it was intentional. He'd been talking about getting back in shape, but then came the fatigue, the night sweats, the cough that wouldn't quit. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, 6 months, maybe less. Janet, who'd spent years building walls against feeling too much, found them useless against this. She watched the man who'd loved her steadily, unglamorously, faithfully for 15 years waste away in their bedroom. She held his hand through chemotherapy that did nothing but make him sicker. She lied to their children about how much time Daddy had left because the truth was too cruel. "I'm sorry I wasn't enough," Marcus whispered 3 days before he died. "Don't," Janet said, her voice breaking. "Don't you dare. You deserved more than steady," he continued, each word an effort. "You deserved fireworks." "I deserved you," she said, and meant it even if part of her wondered if he was right. Marcus died on a Sunday morning with his family around him. Edward was 12 and trying so hard to be the man of the house. The twins were 9 and kept asking when Daddy was coming back. Janet was 36 and suddenly alone in ways that terrified her. The grief was different this time, quieter. She didn't shatter the way she had when her mother died. Instead, she froze, turned to stone, became the kind of woman who handled everything: funeral arrangements, life insurance paperwork, her children's breakdowns, without shedding a single tear in front of anyone. At night, alone, she'd permit herself 5 minutes. 5 minutes to feel the crushing weight of widowhood, of single motherhood, of a future that stretched ahead, endless and exhausting. Then she'd set her timer, and when it beeped, she'd wash her face and go back to being strong.
Mom, you should date again.
I'm fine.
Mom, you are lonely.
Oh, sweetie, I'm not lonely with you here.
But you look sad.
I'm okay.
"Mom, you should date again," Edward said one day, 2 years after his father's death. He was 14, awkward, trying to be helpful. "I'm fine," Janet said. "You're lonely," Jasmine added. The twins were 11 now, too observant for their own good. "I have you 3. I have my work. I have friends. I don't need more than that." "That's not the same as wanting it," Zara said quietly. But Janet had learned the hard way that wanting things was dangerous. Wanting led to hoping, hoping led to vulnerability, and vulnerability led to loss. She'd lost enough. "Love is a luxury I can't afford," she told her children, and she meant it. Her life became a rhythm of sameness. Wake up, make breakfast, get the kids to school. Worker shifts at the hospital. Come home, make dinner. Help with homework. Sleep. Repeat. Weekends were for grocery shopping. Laundry, the twins' soccer games. Edward's debate tournaments. Men asked her out occasionally. Doctors at the hospital. Parents at school events. The guy who worked at her favorite coffee shop. Janet turned them all down with the same polite smile. The same firm I'm not interested in dating right now. Years passed. Edward went to college. The twins started high school. Janet turned 41 and realized she'd been alive but not living. For so long she'd forgotten what the difference felt like. Her children staged an intervention on her 42nd birthday. Mom, you need a life, Edward said, home for winter break. I have a life. You have a routine, Jasmine corrected. That's not the same thing. When's the last time you did something just for you? Zara asked. Something that made you happy? Janet opened her mouth to answer and realized she couldn't. Happiness had become foreign territory, a place she'd abandoned so long ago she'd forgotten the way back. I'm fine, she said again, the words automatic. But she wasn't. She was sealed, unreachable, a woman built by loss who'd forgotten how to be anything else. She just didn't know that everything was about to change, that a morning jog in her new neighborhood would bring the past crashing into her carefully controlled present. That silence from 20 years ago was about to demand an answer. Janet had started jogging again on her therapist's recommendation. You need something that's just yours, Dr. May had said, something that gets you out of your head. So 3 mornings a week, Janet laced up her sneakers at 6 a.m. and ran through her new neighborhood in North Seattle. She'd moved here 6 months ago after the twins left for college. A fresh start in a smaller house that didn't echo with the ghosts of her previous life. The neighborhood was nicer than anywhere she'd lived before, full of renovated craftsman homes and young families and coffee shops that served $12 lattes. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything changed. She was rounding the corner onto Maple Street, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air, when a man stepped out of the blue house on the corner, the one that had been empty for months until someone moved in last week. He was taking out recycling, dressed in pajama pants and a faded Yale sweatshirt, his hair slightly messed from sleep. He looked up, waved casually. Morning. Janet's feet stopped moving before her brain caught up. That face, older, yes, sharper jaw, lines around his eyes, a maturity that made him somehow more handsome than memory allowed, but unmistakably, impossibly him. Stephen? He froze, recycling bin forgotten. His eyes widened as recognition slammed into him. Janet Stone? For 3 endless seconds, they stared at each other across a suburban front lawn, while 20 years collapsed into nothing. Oh my God, Stephen breathed. And then he was moving toward her, closing the distance with quick strides. I can't, this is... Janet didn't know who initiated it, but suddenly they were hugging, and the contact sent electricity through her body in a way that terrified her. He was solid and warm and real, and she could feel his heart hammering against his ribs, matching the frantic rhythm of her own. You live here? She managed when they pulled apart, her voice shaky. Just moved in last week. Software consulting, I'm opening a Seattle office. He was staring at her like she might disappear if he blinked. You're here. You're actually here. I thought I never. I moved back to Washington 15 years ago. Janet wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how she must look. No makeup, hair in a messy ponytail, old running gear. Different part, though. Just relocated to this neighborhood. This is insane, Stephen said, laughing, and the sound was almost the same as she remembered. I mean, what are the odds? Astronomical, Janet thought. The universe playing jokes. They stood there awkwardly until Stephen ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from high school. I'm sorry, I'm in pajamas on my lawn acting like I've seen a ghost. Would you want to get coffee? Catch up? I mean, if you have time. You were jogging, so maybe. I have time, Janet heard herself say. 2 hours later, they were still sitting in the corner booth of a local cafe, their coffee long cold. Stephen had changed into jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than Janet's monthly car payment, but somehow the wealth that had once seemed like an insurmountable barrier now just felt like background noise. They got talking. I remember everything about you. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Janet's chest tightened. Stephen, sorry, that was too much. I just meant... He paused, collecting himself. I'm now too old to pretend I don't remember spending half of senior year wishing I was brave enough to talk to you. Janet's breath caught. You wanted to talk to me? Are you kidding? I was obsessed with you. He laughed, but there was old pain in it. I used to get to school early just to watch you study in the library. Pathetic, right? I did the same thing, Janet admitted quietly. I'd time my arrival so I could walk past your locker. Stephen leaned back, looking stunned. All that time we were both scared, Janet finished. I thought you'd never be interested in someone like me. Different worlds, you know? I thought you'd think I was some privileged rich kid trying to slum it. My dad made it very clear what kind of girl I was supposed to end up with. And you? He stopped, his jaw tightening. You were real. You were kind. You were everything I wanted and nothing my parents would have approved of. Did you end up marrying what they approved of? Never married, Stephen said. Came close once. Emily Wu's corporate lawyer. My mother loved her. I proposed because it seemed like the logical next step. He stared into his cold coffee. She said yes, and I had a panic attack in the parking lot of the restaurant. What happened? I realized I was about to spend my life with someone who felt like a business contract. Called it off 6 months before the wedding. My parents didn't speak to me for a year. He met her eyes. What about you? The way you said was when you mentioned your husband. Cancer 5 years ago. The words came easier now, worn smooth by repetition. Marcus was a good man. We had 3 kids together. Edward's 20 now. At UW, the twins, Jasmine and Zara, just started at Seattle University. 3 kids, Stephen said softly. You built a whole life. I survived, Janet corrected. That's not the same thing. Something in her tone made Stephen lean forward. Janet, my mother died of cancer. Then Marcus. I spent my 20s raising kids and working night shifts. I spent my 30s watching my husband die and trying to hold my family together. She heard the hardness in her voice, couldn't stop it. So yes, I survived. I did what needed to be done. That's all? That's not all, Stephen said quietly. You raised 3 kids alone after losing your husband. You built a career. You're still standing. That's not just survival, that's strength. Janet felt something crack inside her chest. A fissure in the walls she'd spent years building. Don't what? Don't look at me like that. Like I'm still that girl in the library. She stood abruptly. I should go. The twins are visiting this weekend and I need to. Janet, wait. Stephen stood too. I'm sorry if I said something wrong. Seeing you again after all these years was a coincidence, Janet said firmly. A nice one. But Stephen, I'm not. I can't. She couldn't finish the sentence. Because she didn't know what she was trying to say. That she couldn't feel this pull toward him. That she couldn't afford to want something beyond her carefully controlled life. That hope was too dangerous. Can I at least have your number? Stephen asked. As neighbors, if nothing else. Janet hesitated, then pulled out her phone. They exchanged numbers in silence. For what it's worth, Stephen said as she turned to leave. I never stopped wondering what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to talk to you back then, if I'd told you how I felt. Janet looked back at him. This man who was somehow both a stranger and the boy who'd haunted her dreams for years. We were kids, Stephen. We didn't know what we were feeling. I knew, he said simply. I was 17 and terrified, but I knew. Janet walked home with her heart racing and her mind spinning. She'd spent 5 years building a life where nothing unexpected could hurt her, where routine was safety and emotional distance was survival. And in one morning, Stephen Brooks had walked back into her life and threatened all of it.
If you've ever felt guilty for wanting happiness after loss, this moment is going to stay with you. Janet isn't weak for being afraid. She's brave for risking hope. Because when you've survived this much, hope is the scariest thing of all.
That night, lying in bed, she stared at his name in her phone. One text and she could open a door she'd kept locked for 20 years. One text and she could risk feeling something again. Her finger hovered over the screen. Then she set the phone down and turned off the light. Some doors were locked for a reason. Stephen texted 3 days later. Just a simple, "How are you?" That sat unanswered on Janet's phone for 6 hours before she finally replied with an equally simple fine, but fine was a lie. She wasn't fine. She was rattled. She was lying awake at night thinking about the way he'd looked at her in that cafe. Like she was someone worth looking at. Like years hadn't passed. Like she was still the girl who'd made his hands shake. Not a widow with emotional baggage that could sink a ship. The texts continued. Good morning messages. Links to articles he thought she'd find interesting. A photo of his disastrous attempt at hanging curtains with the caption, "I should have hired someone." Janet found herself smiling at her phone like a teenager, then hating herself for it.
Mom, who are you texting?
No one, sweetie.
"Who are you texting?" Jasmine asked one evening when she was home for fall break, noticing her mother's unusual phone activity. "No one," Janet said too quickly. "That's a someone smile," Zara added, exchanging a look with her twin. Janet had forgotten how perceptive her daughters were. "Just a neighbor. Old friend from high school, actually. He moved in down the street." "He?" Both twins leaned forward with identical expressions of interest. "Don't start." But they did start, and by the time Edward came home for Thanksgiving, her children had somehow orchestrated a casual dinner where Stephen was invited, under the pretense of Janet being too polite to say no to a neighbor spending the holiday alone. Janet wanted to kill her children. She also wanted to thank them, which made her want to kill them more. Stephen arrived with wine and an apple pie from the bakery the twins had specifically mentioned their mother loved. He wore a navy sweater and smiled nervously, a vulnerability that made him somehow more attractive. Edward answered the door and Janet watched from the kitchen as her 6-foot-tall son sized up this man from his mother's past with a protectiveness that made her heart ache. "Edward Wells," her son said, extending his hand. "You must be Stephen." "Stephen Brooks. Your mom's told me a lot about you." Stephen shook his hand firmly. "Computer science major, right, at UW?" Edward blinked, surprised. "Yeah, how did you?" "Your mom's proud of you. All of you." That was the moment Edward's stance softened slightly. Over dinner, Janet watched as Stephen asked genuine questions about Edward's studies, about the twins' experiences at Seattle U, about their father. He didn't shy away from Marcus's memory or pretend the man hadn't existed. "You sounds like your dad was a good man," Stephen said when Edward shared a story about Marcus teaching him to change a tire. "You're lucky you had him. Mom's the one who kept everything together, though," Edward said, looking at Janet with an expression that made her throat tight. "After Dad died, he paused, collecting himself. She's the strongest person I know." "I know," Stephen said quietly, his eyes finding Janet's across the table. "I've always known." After dinner, after her children had suspiciously remembered they all had somewhere else to be, Janet and Stephen stood in her kitchen doing dishes in a silence that felt both comfortable and charged. "Your kids are great," Stephen said, drying a plate. "They ambushed you. Best ambush of my life." He smiled, then grew serious. "Edward's protective of you. That's good. You should have people protecting you." "I don't need protecting. Everyone needs protecting sometimes, Janet, even the strong ones. Especially the strong ones." Janet felt that crack in her chest widen. "Stephen, whatever this is, I can't. Can't or won't. Both, neither, I don't know." She set down the dish she was washing, her hands trembling. "Marcus has been gone 5 years, and some days it still feels like yesterday. The kids are finally okay. I'm finally okay. I can't risk." "Risk what, being happy?" Stephen turned her gently to face him. "Janet, I'm not trying to replace Marcus. I couldn't if I wanted to. He was your husband, the father of your children. That's not something that gets erased. Then what are you doing here?" "I'm honoring what you built, the life you made, the strength it took to survive. And I'm hoping that maybe there's room for something new, not instead of your past, alongside it." Janet felt tears threatening. "I don't know how to do this. It's been so long since I let myself want something just for me, so let me wait while you figure it out. I've already waited years. What's a little longer?" But the waiting got complicated when Janet ran into Stephen having lunch with a woman at the cafe where they'd had their reunion. An elegant woman in her 30s, laughing at something Stephen said. Janet walked past quickly, her stomach churning with something that felt suspiciously like jealousy, followed immediately by guilt for feeling jealous, followed by anger at herself for caring at all. She ignored his texts for 2 days until he showed up at her door.
You need to leave. Now.
Not until we talk.
There's nothing to say.
Please, just listen.
"That was my business partner," he said without preamble. "Rachel Wilfred, Emily's sister, actually. She's married to a man named Jeffrey. They have 2 kids, and we were discussing the Seattle office expansion." Janet tried to close the door. "You don't owe me explanations." Stephen stopped the door with his hand. "Yes, I do. Because the look on your face when you walked past that cafe, that's the look of someone who cares. And I need you to know there's no one else. There hasn't been anyone serious since Emily. And that ended 8 years ago. There's only you, Janet. There's only ever been you. Something broke inside her then. Something that had been holding tight for 5 years, for 20 years, maybe her whole life. I'm scared, she whispered. I know, so am I, he stepped closer. But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what if. Aren't you tired of wondering? Janet was. God, she was so tired. She kissed him, and it felt like coming home to a place she'd never been, like 20 years of silence finally finding their voice. When they pulled apart, she was crying. I loved Marcus, she said fiercely. I loved him, and he deserved better than steady. And I'm always going to carry that. I know, Stephen said gently. Carry it, I'll help you carry it. That's what love does. 6 months later, Stephen proposed in her kitchen while she was making coffee. No fancy restaurant, no grand gesture. Just him, down on one knee with a simple ring, saying, I don't have a speech prepared because I've been practicing what to say to you for many years, and it all comes down to this, I love you. I've always loved you. Will you marry me? Janet said yes through tears, and for the first time in years they were happy tears. The wedding was small. On a Saturday afternoon in April, Edward walked her down the aisle with the twins as her bridesmaids. Stephen's parents didn't come. Some walls take longer to break down, but his sister did, and that was enough. As Janet stood there in a simple cream dress, hands joined with Stephen's, she thought about the girl she'd been in that high school hallway, the woman she'd become through loss and struggle, the person she was learning to be now, someone who could be strong and soft, independent and partnered, someone who'd survived and was finally learning to live. Their love didn't arrive early, the officiant said, reading the words Janet had written, but it arrived right, at exactly the moment they were both ready to receive it. Stephen squeezed her hand, and Janet squeezed back, no longer scared of hope, no longer guilty for choosing happiness, just ready finally to let herself be loved. Janet learned that love doesn't erase the past. It makes room for it. Some mornings she still woke before dawn out of habit, her body remembering years of survival. But now when she padded into the kitchen, Stephen would already be there, coffee brewing, sleeves rolled up, humming softly like he belonged, and somehow he did. They didn't pretend life had been easy. Photos of Marcus remained on the shelves. Stories about him were told without tension, without apology. Love, Janet discovered, was not a replacement. It was an expansion. Edward called more often than he admitted was necessary. The twins teased Stephen relentlessly and loved him fiercely. Holidays grew louder, warmer. The house filled with motion instead of memory. Sometimes on her morning jog, Janet would slow near Maple Street and smile at the blue house on the corner. Not because fate had finally been kind, but because she had been brave enough to open the door when it knocked again. She had survived, and now she was living. And Stephen, who had once waited in silence, learned that some loves don't arrive on time. They arrive when you're finally ready to receive them.
Their love didn't arrive early, and it didn't arrive loudly. It arrived when grief had softened into memory. And maybe that's the love worth waiting for. Not the one that saves you, but the one that meets you exactly where you are and still chooses to stay. Thank you for spending your time here. If this story moved you in any way, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments.